to the 11th episode of the Raceday review. I am Joe Jess 19. I'm the lead fantasy NASCAR writer for LineStar, a daily fantasy sports analytics company, and we will be breaking down the Pennzoil 400. It was run on Sunday at Las Vegas Motor Speedway. Not one of my favorite races of the year, not one of my favorite tracks of the year, but this actually was a much better race than I was expecting. I was kind of down on it coming out of Daytona, but I really kind of did enjoy the race. Some back and forth, a little bit of drama, all sorts of things to break down as we go through it. We're going to jump right in. I know last week we talked about Ryan Newman and Daytona 500 crash. Anyone who's not following along, he is okay. He's going to be out for the next couple of weeks because of a head injury, but he was out and walking and talking and apparently breaking balls in the garage from what everyone was talking about. So he's back to his normal self. He's just got to do some rehab, get cleared by the doctors, and he should be back in the number 6. Ross Chastain ran the race for him in his car this week. So everyone was happy that they were able to do that. He gets owner's points, but Newman doesn't get um, driver points. So pretty much he has to win to make the playoffs at this point if he loses and if he misses out on any more races. But that's just a bookkeeping thing right now. So looking at the perfect lineup for the Pennzoil 400, it kind of went relatively exactly what I was looking for. Right, qualifying got rained out, so the field was actually set with last year's driver's points. So Kyle Busch would have started first, Truex second, then you had Harvick third, and Logano fifth. Fourth was, I can tell you right now, no reason to guess. Fourth was Denny Hamlin. Don't know how I forgot about him. But because of an issue with inspections, Hamlin and Kyle Busch, as well as Christopher Bell, all had to go to the back. They were going to be scored from the front as per DraftKings rules and FanDuel's rules, but they were actually physically going to start in the rear, which threw a wrench into everything because I was really banking on um, one or two drivers that started in the top 10 to finish in the top 10 lead laps, but I wasn't expecting it to be someone on the front row. There was always a chance. If Kyle Busch started in the front row, I still didn't really like him because I didn't like his car. He didn't like his car. He hated every minute of it. Going into on practice on Friday, so he wasn't really pleased with everything there. Truex didn't like not that he didn't like his car, his practice times were terrible. So at a track that didn't really show a lot of potential for someone's going to start up front and stay up front and they're going to dominate the entire race, having two drivers that hated their cars start on the top also would have added a little extra layer of intrigue to it, so I wasn't feeling the top row. But once Kyle Busch ended up failing, then that moved Harvick into the pole position, so that he was able to beat Truex off the box and lead some laps, reach off out of the box and lead some laps. And that really changed my thinking of what I wanted. Usually there's some sort of mishap, some driver that doesn't do well, or a couple of drivers last year that didn't do well. Uh, in qualifying, they ended up qualifying in the 20s, and even those drivers were able to lead laps last year. I was hoping something like that would happen again this year. It didn't because all the drivers that started in the 20s were all drivers that finished 20th in driver points and owner points last year. So they weren't high quality drivers, but my theory of how the race was going to play out and who we needed to pick to end up being in the perfect lineup actually did hit on the nose. I wanted two drivers in the top 10 that could lead laps and finish well. I got that with Logano and Harvick. I wanted four drivers starting in the 20s. I'm going to give Di Benedetto the credit of starting in the 20 just to make this a little easier. That picked up spots. I didn't think they were going to be able to make this big of moves because of the crazy last caution with 2 laps. Well, I guess it was thrown with 4 laps left, and it started with 2 laps, and then the caution ended. The race ended on a caution. Because of that whole sequence, this entire lineup got jumbled up pretty well. It still would have hit with something that looked like this, especially from a starting position aspect, because John Hunter Nemechek was running in the top 10, so he could have had a shot, but he ended up having a problem um, late. And then there are a couple other drivers that were in. Alex Bowman looked like he could have won the race. He would have been a driver that started 13th, that started 10th, that won, that with a win would have probably nudged him in here. So there are a lot of things changed late that really jumbled around. A lot of people lost a lot of money on the last couple of laps, which seems to happen often. That's why you have to. I prefer diversifying and spreading my lineups out a little bit, um, especially with these tertiary guys. If you like, when we get to the model and all that other fun stuff, I'll show you who popped for me and things like that. But you want to lean on those drivers if you can. But um, yeah, so where I was going with all that is my targets, the targets that I wrote up in my article of who we wanted to pick, or at least where we wanted to look for our drivers, was pretty much spot on. Um, the only thing that I was surprised about, Corey LaJoy, who was starting I didn't want anyone starting 30th or worse, just because especially the way that this field was set, those were the bottom 9 cars, 30th to 38th, the bottom 9 cars um, in the field, and I just didn't think they had really a good enough potential to score well. LaJoy scored 43 points, so if you had him, good for you. I didn't have any of them. I faded them entirely. So that maybe that would have won me a little more money, especially I had a lot more John Hunter Nemechek than I really wanted. Then eh, it would have worked out well in the end, but all things considered. Anyway, so the perfect lineup ended up being Ty Dillon, who started 24th, right where we were looking. He was able to go move up to 10th. Check out the loop data. I was really surprised that he finished that well. His average running position was 20th though, so he was running poorly most of the race, and he just got shuffled up. So he was a big benefactor in the last couple of laps. I would have been watching him because I put him as a driver to consider. His practice times were great. We're gonna go scroll down to Ty Dillon here. Um, that was Timmy Hill. Ty Dillon, I had him owned at 23%, which is slightly over the field. The $4 he was owned at 20% and 21.7 in the $10. His average finish here wasn't great, 24.8, considering he was starting 24th. His average run position also not great. His adjusted practice time for single lap average was very good, but I was worried more about his Vegas average and his similar average. So picking up a couple of spots. It's still early in the season. I really was worried about. That's where I really was worried about. I projected him to finish 24th. I had him as a top 13th. 13th was his best finishing position in the models that I was running. So he did have some ceiling to him. That's why I had him at about 23% of my lineups. But I didn't want to focus on too many of these drivers starting in the 20s. I know I said I recommended them. I recommended the range, and that is very true. But when the qualifying shook out the way that it did, I didn't want to go too heavy on those guys. I pushed some of the guys up to like Almirola, who was starting 12th, or Bowman, who was starting. Again, I'm just going by memory here, but drivers like Almirola starting 12th, Bowman starting 10th. Those drivers I thought would serve the purpose of some of those drivers that would have started in the 20s and moved up. So I kind of had to adjust on the fly there. Either one of these guys ended up working out for me. Um, but we'll go on a breakdown from there. So Bubba Wallace, I didn't have high hopes. I was not on whatsoever. He's always like a boomer bust option, so I never really, I had him at 10%, which is still more than the field, as I erase it. 10%, which was still more than the field, so he was a very low owned option. Not a lot of people were on him, and he made the perfect lineup. But Vegas average of 27th in his races here, similar position of 26th, average running positions around the same place. His practice speeds were terrible. He was starting 24th. As a GPP dart, as a um, satellite dart, that he made sense there. But to be honest with you, again, another driver whose average running position was 22nd. So he didn't do much until the very end, and then out of nowhere, he just shot into the top 10 with a sixth place finish. It was a crazy, crazy, crazy way to end the race. It didn't look as exciting because they're not so much. Some stuff happened up front. He had Logano who was leading, Bowman who was coming around and gaining speed, and I thought that he was going to be able to catch him. He had 6 laps to make up about 4/10 of a second. Thought he might have been able to do it because he was just running that much faster than Logano. Once he got up to his bumper, you never know what was going to happen after that. So I really would have loved to see that race finish green, just because I didn't. My lineups that did poorly because of the restart ended up other lineups took their place. So it's not like I had a real vested interest in it. I wasn't really going to win too much money either way. It was pretty much a small net negative over the restart, but still up for the week. Um, but I really would have loved to see if Bowman could actually track down Logano. It would have been a very interesting um, finish to it. If having the race finish under a caution was kind of blah. I was expecting a two lap shootout, and I got about a lap and a quarter out of it, which really, eh, odd. So even the risks that the crew chiefs took by staying out on old tires didn't really make a difference because they only had to stay out for a lap and a quarter, not even 2 miles to make for the win. But that's neither here nor there. Di Benedetto, I thought he surprised me. Everyone, since he's got the better car and he's in better equipment, he's running Paul Menard's better equipment this year. Everyone was talking him up at how they loved him at this track. I was expecting him to be higher owned. I had him at 20% just as a hedge, really. I thought he would be closer to 35 or 40% owned, just the way that people were talking about him with his price and starting 19th. I know this was with his old equipment, his last 5 finishing as 22.8 and his similar finish of 21st. I understand, yes, that is with the old equipment, and Menard did run well here, but Di Benedetto, this was another fade ownership for me. I did a 20% just in case that he did pop off. At least I had my bases covered a little bit because his 10 lap average was pitiful. He didn't even run a 15 lap average. Yes, he was very fast on the single lap times, but the bottom fell out of him on practice, and I was off of him entirely. Starting 16th, he had a lot of work to do. He ended up finishing second. I projected him as a 27th finish in my most accurate model from last race, so that might have been a little off. I probably would have liked a 22nd or a 23rd. Would have been a projection if I were to hand adjust it, but um, still 27th. Average projection 15th is probably about right. A high of 12, I could see it. Um, Obviously the one that I posted was the one that had the worst floor on him. Di Benedetto, he another driver that he was hanging out in the 19th, 20th place most of the races. Average position was 14, so it wasn't as bad, but still, I had him at 19th or 20th place. I was really surprised at where he ended up, and he ended up finishing. I keep clicking the wrong button. I apologize for that. but he ended up finishing much better than I would have expected. Um, and at least he wasn't owned as high as I thought he was going to be, because that would have been an absolute positive mess. What's going on? Another TV viewer, thank you very much for streaming in. I hope you enjoy some NASCAR content. This is going to be a NASCAR only stream, no games or anything tonight. Hopefully, sometime later this week. I'm thinking about Thursday, possibly. So, going to Logano, I thought there were going to be two dominators coming out of the top 10. Um, and in the Line Star chat, for anyone who's a Line Star user, I ranked them. Kyle Busch, yes, it says that he's starting first, but he was starting at the very end, and he hated his car, so I was not expecting him to do anything. So wrote him off. In a satellite or something like that as a real low owned play, maybe a share or two. That's something Kyle Busch, because figured if he liked his car and he was able to make adjustments and do what he needed to do, he had a shot of getting to the top 10 by the um, third stage, right, well, for the beginning of stage three. And then from then, if he could make his way forward, I figured he had a shot at leading some laps, but he was the most expensive driver starting from the back, and he was getting scored from the front. And it was just a no thanks. I had some Bush. I had no Hamlin. No reason for that whatsoever. Um, doesn't really run here well. Doesn't really have a great car. Starting from the rear too. I liked Hamlin as my number one dominator. Truex as my number two. I liked Larson, then Logano. I really liked Larson this week. I thought he had a very fast car with a very good history, which is also very true. Um, a lot of errors there. I apologize. But Logano, I thought, had some upside to him. At my top five dominators, I put him in. I don't think I owned him nearly as much. I had him 21%, so below the field, but in a last five finish of fifth. Less similar tracks is 13.8, which is surprising. Um, these were all with positive place differential, an average run position of fifth. He had the 11th best weighted single lap speed, and wasn't really great on the long runs, which so that was really not what I was expecting. I chose him as a dominator just because he had led a lot of laps up until this point. Every race at Vegas, he's led 20 laps, 40 laps, 30 laps, 40 laps. So I knew he'd find a way to get up there. I just didn't think he'd be able to stay up there. And he only led 50 laps. He led when he counted. Um, but with 54 laps, it's not like he truly dominated. But I knew he'd be in the mix of things. It's just how it all would shake out in the end. So I liked him. I gonna sort by my ownership because we'll see the guy who I loved sorted the wrong way. Not really too sure why they keep doing this to me. They sort it oddly, but I had 70% of Kevin Harvick. This is a low attrition race. We went over what that means on the last stream, but basically there aren't a lot of drivers that finish poorly here. I had 8 drivers this race out of 38 have a problem. That's close to 25%, so I'm well within that. Um, the 25% window there, I pushed it almost up to that entirely. So just in case Harvick didn't dominate, at least I had a shot with 30% of my lineups to do some damage. But Harvick had a very fast car in the short runs, and so the competition caution helped because he was able to. And there was a caution before that because Daniel Suarez literally couldn't go anywhere. This is actually, oddly enough, this is the second race in a row that a caution was thrown before the first lap was completed, because last race there was um, the rain that delayed it, and then this race Suarez stalled out on the fucking restart, so that really was a kick in the shins. But so Kevin Harvick, my biggest ownership by far. I really enjoyed what I saw from him. He was fast in practice, with the fourth fastest single lap speed, the fastest 10 lap average. He wasn't that great over 15 or 20, and we were expecting some long green flag runs this week, so that was slightly worrisome. But he turned that into 92 laps led and a spot in the perfect lineup. And again, he didn't finish well just because of the way that the race ended, but his average run position was third, so he was up in the mix the entire time. He'd be running well. Chase Elliott would chase him down. Chase Elliott would be running well, and then a stage would end, and then Harvick would end up winning off the block and lead for the first 20 to 25 laps, and then Chase Elliott would um, chase him down, and it would be over and over and over again. That's what made this race more interesting than usual, because there are a lot of green flag passes for the lead. Um, the cars that were built for the long run caught up to the cars that were built for the short run. It was a very interesting way that everything happened. So it was much more entertaining than I was expecting. But I loved Harvick here. He led 200 laps, two or three races, at least two races ago. I knew he had absolute dominator potential. He was a slight price. He wasn't the most expensive driver, but he was expensive in his own right. But he had, without having to allocate any lineups to Kyle Busch, it made it much easier to have a high amount of Harvick lineups. If he were to have busted, I would have been sitting there just crying the entire time because that just would have not worked out well for me. I was very overexposed to the field, but that's why you have to do things like that to make a little money. So Ricky Stenhouse Jr., a driver I was debating writing up, um, mostly because of practice speeds. He, I had him at 24%, so I was overexposed to him, or at least over the average. His last five at Vegas were 21.8, but this is what threw me off to him. He usually qualifies well and falls back. He averaged losing 8 spots a race. Um, and that, so basically finishing 21st or 22nd was him holding on to dear life and not just spinning out of control. Then at the similar tracks last year, he averaged a finish of 19.1 with an average loss of 3.8 spots. So he usually qualifies well and doesn't pick anything up. This time he had the luxury of qualifying poorly. I don't think that 23 is right. 26. I don't know why some of these are off at a certain spot, but he had the luxury of starting poorly. Oh, I know why. Because these starting positions reflect with everyone moving up. Now I remember what I did. This isn't where they were scored from. This is where they physically started from. So I have Smithley would have been further down, but that's why they're off by a couple. So anyone who's watching, if they think I have the starting position wrong, this isn't the DraftKings starting position or the official starting position. This is where they actually physically started from once everyone moved to the back. That makes sense now. Anyway, so back to what I was saying about not Ross Chastain, Ricky Stenhouse Jr. So Stenhouse Jr. was starting. He was scored pretty far back, so I get that. You have some scored at 26th, but his car wasn't fast. His 10 lap average wasn't fast. His similar finishes weren't great, and he usually loses spots. Um, he was like a bat out of hell last year. I know he's at a different um, team this year, but it wasn't not really a better team. So the whole thing is just he's the driver we're gonna have to look on. We're gonna have to see if we can trust his stats, his last year's stats, nearly as much um, as today's race would have seen, because it's really not. He's always interesting. You call him Ricky Stenhouse for a reason. He likes to crash. This time he didn't crash, and this time he went well. So he's another GPP. Um, I actually played him in my cash game lineup just because of the upside. Because these days you need to have some upside in your GPP lineups to your cash game lineups to even cash. So I figured take a stab at someone starting 26th. Worst comes to worst, I didn't think anyone starting in the 30s was going to be able to pass him. So my only thing was making sure that he didn't shoot himself in the foot, which is always a possibility with him. So that's the perfect lineup. They ended up scoring 377 DraftKings points. If you notice, Chase Elliott was a lap leader. He actually led the second most amount of laps and is not in the perfect lineup. That happens often at Las Vegas, more than I've ever really remember seeing it. His tire went down and he crashed and he actually finished 26th. That is not, and his average finishing position, his average running position was seventh. So that is just totally, that sucks. You feel for the kid, um, because he ran a great race. He led a shit ton of laps. He won both stages. I didn't have nearly enough of him. I only had 15% of him, so it was right around on the field. And even with plummeting, he still scored 43.5 points. But that's why I wasn't on him. That sounds like great in hindsight, but he had like two top five finishes and three bottom 10 finishes, and that's because he either did great or he bottomed out, and he never really led laps. That's the biggest issue. Is sure if you like it would have been great if he finished second, but finish second is only going to get you about 55 points, maybe some fastest laps if you don't lead any laps for 10 for 9 10 grand 55 points probably is not going to get him in the perfect lineup, especially if there are two drivers that do end up dominating. So he didn't have the upside of some of these other drivers, and he didn't show the speed. He had the 20th best weighted single lap average and the 16th best 10 lap average. So he had a very good car on the very long runs and just decided not to show it in practice. And it's things like that when you get drivers like that wrong for a race. I build these models to hope to see what they're going to do and see what the range of possibilities are. But like I don't like how do you predict that? You just that's why if you're playing a lot of lineups, um, you have to diversify a little bit. But he was starting 10th. He finished 26th. I expected him to finish about 14th. Um, he hit his floor. That literally was my floor projection, which is pretty funny. I do enjoy when that happens. I run 10 different models depending on different on weighting all different things like practice times. Some have the practice times weighted more. Some have average running position. Some take account where the driver is starting. Some take account where some don't. So I have a nice little um, combination of models to choose from, and the most accurate one from the previous time that they ran here, I post in my article, and then I just take all of them, make an average of them, make ceiling and floor. There come some real wonky ones that you'll get guys like JJ Yeley winning. I throw that one out. Um, and things like that, because the way to adjust for some things over adjusts and things like that, especially if drivers end up um, practicing well or practicing poorly or qualifying. There's some variables that are thrown in there that throw certain models out. So that's why you get a nice little range. But that one hit exactly where it was. That was pretty impressive. But Elliot, I was not on, and it hurt for most of the race. I had a couple of good lineups with him in it, so that would have been nice. But unfortunately, he fell out, and I didn't have him in a ton of lineups. So those were like the one-off hedge lineups that were doing their job. So just to go over the starting positions and things like that, my number one owned driver was um, Harvick. I had him projected as a second finish. He finished eighth, right around where he could have. Um, I this is what I enjoy the most out of doing this is the and the why I have the ranges here is Logano finished first. I project him to finish fifth. So the model that I posted for everyone um, was a fifth place finish, but he had a ceiling at first. And not to say that every driver starting in the top 10 I had a ceiling. There was actually a very small amount of people. There were only three drivers that I had predictions to field at the first. Truex, Logano, and Larson. Logano's the only one that even got close to doing it. Truex had troubles with his car after fighting it the entire time, and Larson just didn't do. Larson hurt. I had him as a floor sixth, ceiling at first. He ended up finishing in the top 10. A top 10 finish doesn't really do much for you when you're starting. He was starting sixth actually, but physically starting fourth. I had him in 30% of my lineups. I wrote him up in my article. I liked him as a GPP play because I thought he had abilities to lead laps. I think I went over, I talked about him being fast in practice. I talked about him running well here, so that's why I really liked him, and it still kind of hurts. But just to run through the field very quickly for you, because I don't want to run too long. So Truex, Blaney's a driver who didn't practice well. I had some of them just in case. Predicted him to finish right away where he started. That's where he's run recently. His place differential is pretty funny because he always qualifies well, and last year he just couldn't do anything a mile and a half. This year he's had a hot start to the season, so he'll be someone to look out for, especially at Auto Club. Um, Kozlowski had some dominator potential, started a little further back. He runs very well here. Um, had a little problem last year at similar tracks, but a seventh running position. Surprised how poorly he ran last year at the track similar to this, but he didn't practice well. He's a driver that if he ended up doing well, I probably would have had a problem. He finished seventh. I projected him to finish fifth. So right around what his average projection was where he finished. Um, Truex went through his floor. Logano did what we wanted him to do. Larson also went through his floor. Uh, Blaney, I was pretty close on. He had a wide projection because you don't really know what's going to happen to him. His similars were not great. Boyer I liked. He was fast. He was starting ninth. Um, I projected him to finish ninth, so he was close. Actually finished right where his average was. So that's a nice one. He was very fast in the single lap, a weighted single lap. So this one, he wasn't the fastest in the second practice, but he was fastest as what's his face? He was fastest when you took into account some of the first practice also. So that I weight them because first practice does have something to do with in race speed, but not a whole bunch. I weight the second practice more, so he did end up nosing out another driver to get to the first, but he doesn't really do well here. He usually um, qualifies well and falls back, and that's exactly what he did. Elliot Byron, um, another driver with a raw deal. I think he actually ran pretty well. William Byron. Yeah, his average running position was eighth, so he ran very well, and just got shuffled out towards the end. Had some of them, not too much, at 4%. No one else really had him either. Just qualified too well. Another driver who qualifies well and falls back. I know he didn't actually qualify, but you get the point. Uh, Bowman hurt. I really wish I had a number. I had a couple of good lineups with Bowman in it, and when that caution happened, I projected him as to finish fourth, and he had a good shot to do it. Uh, over, over that, that was nice. I full fade of Kurt Busch does not run here. An average finish at Las Vegas of 26.5 in the last 5 races. Didn't have enough speed in his car to make up that for me, so I probably would have wanted like some of him, but I ended up with none of them in 140 lineups. worked out well for me. He scored 8.5 points. Almirola, I had high hopes for Almirola. I thought 40% was going to get over the field. I really did. I thought he was going to be like a 25 to 30% driver. Average finishing position of 10th. He had, I want to say, 3 out of 4 top 10s at here at Vegas. Great over the single lap, decent over the 10 lap average. He runs the same out of the same team as Harvick and Boyer, who all had speed. Um, Boyer was very fast, but these guys I thought really had a shot. His average run position was not great though. He had an issue early and never really recovered. He ran about 15th, so I can't be too upset um, about those last cautions because there's nothing really that nothing would have helped me there. Ross Chastain, I was decidedly underweight on. I like him as a driver. I love him playing in truck and Xfinity. Wasn't too excited for him here. These numbers are conflated because he's with a different team entirely and much worse equipment. But even with Newman, he had some good speed here, but everyone was going to be on him 25% owned at his price. No thanks. Didn't really have a lot of Jones. He sank like a lead balloon. Wasn't really on him at all. Didn't really, nothing to like about him. Jimmy Johnson was a driver I kind of wanted to recommend. An average finish of 15th, a similar finish of 15th. Good speed in the car. He had a very fast in the single lap, very fast in the 10 lap, starting 17th. He finished 5th. Not too sure why he only scored 25 points. Hold on. Yeah, no. Because his name is similar to, yeah, so that's why. Can't believe he didn't, with that score, I can't believe he didn't get in the perfect lineup. But yeah, I had none of them. No one, neither did anyone else. It seems like it. But he should have been on my radar. I was looking to write him up, but my average, this average projected is wrong too. God damn it. I knew that I always have to fix them, and I never do. But so his average projected was a 10.8. His ceiling was 4th, and his floor was 21st. So he hit right around where he was, not the 10.8, but everything else. So that's, yeah, Johnson. I should have trusted my model there. That's one that's going to kick me in the ass because I would have, even if I had 20%, I would have been way high in the field. Sometimes sometimes you do this to you build a model to take your personal biases out, and then that one would have worked out very well for me. Um, you live and you learn. At least hopefully I'll remember this for the next time they go to Vegas, that these things do work themselves out. Talked about the Benedetto, didn't have anything for Priest, no real interest in him. Austin Dillon was a lot more touted than I was expecting, but not as high owned. At about 30%. It worked out very well for me. He was a driver kind of like um, Ricky Stenhouse Jr., but not to the extreme. Driver who qualifies well, finishes poorly, but he finishes better and loses fewer spots, if that makes any sense. His average finishing position is 5 spots higher, and his average place differential is 5 slots. He lost 5 fewer spots. So that means he's better at running the race as opposed to just like as opposed to qualifying well and holding on to make sure that he doesn't fall off the face of the earth. Um, his car, if I remember correctly, was not superb in practice, 22nd and 24th, but starting 20th, he finished 4th, which was much higher than I would have expected. His average finish was his projected finish was 17th, his average 14th, and he way did over through his ceiling. So I wrote him up thinking that he would possibly get into the top 10, and um, he did much better than that. Chris Buescher, another driver. He was one of the drivers I was way over on. 40 fantasy points, not anything to shake a stick at. His average finish of 17.8. But see, this is what I love to see. He finishes 17th, but he normally starts around 30th, 26th. But in that area, even at similar tracks, starts around 25th, finishes 17.8, 18th. His running position's right around where he finishes, so it's not like it was it's fluky, so that's great. He practiced, he was starting 22nd, so he's got some there. He starts in the top 20s. He finished 14th, um, a little below where my average was, but right where he wanted to. Tyler Reddick. I don't know why I had so much of Tyler Reddick. That's probably because of his price. That's an issue. I probably should have noticed that. Scoring 33 points, not the worst thing in the world. He ran here well here in Xfinity, so I can't get too mad. But that's odd, especially seeing where the other drivers, where the other people had him. We went through Stenhouse, went to him. Michael McDowell had a issue with his car late, didn't want any of him. John Hunter Nemechek, I had my eye on him this entire race because I don't exactly know what to expect from him. Um, these for these rookies, I just kind of guess according to their practice speed and when they were starting. But his single lap average was 10th. His single lap weighted average, and his 10 lap was 11th in the second practice. Starting 20 at this, I think he was starting 29th. I thought he had all the upside in the world. He finished 24th, which was crushing. I had him a projected finish of 18th, which would have been beautiful. His average was about 18th, a high of 12th, because there's not too much to go on. I really loved I was curious. How about that? He was a safer option and a less expensive option than Stenhouse. They were starting right next to each other. Stenhouse is a known quality. It's a boom or bust. I would rather take the unknown and know that he's probably not going to fall off the face of the earth than worry about Stenhouse just like spinning out in the middle of nowhere for no frickin' reason whatsoever. So that's why the ownership was right there. And then Bubba Wallace, I wasn't really bothering with, but those three drivers started right with each other, and I very curious to see what happened with what was going to happen with John Hunter Nemechek because he had a very fast car over the short and the long runs. He got as high as second place, mostly sometimes because of um, strategy, sometimes because he was just fast. He picked up two fastest laps. His average front position was 20th, so it was kind of fluky, and he did come back to where he needed to be. But he had a shot at, he was running in the top two or three after a late caution. Um, and that was just unfortunate that he crashed out. You live and you learn. I think he's starting back there at that salary. I'll play him every week. He'll get there eventually. He'll not have an issue late on, and I'm not worried about him. But considering I had no Michael McDowell, no Corey LaJoy, no Gase, no Huff, no Poole, no Garrett Smithley, no one else really had them, so they've all been reading the same scouting reports as I have. Um, there was no reason to play really any of these guys. Good for LaJoy. Can't believe he did it. He ended up finishing 16th. And let me just see where he was running. 25th, so he would have picked up some spots, but again, it was mostly because of he probably got shuffled up late in the race, so that was kind of fluky. But overall, you can't really, not really too sure why I had so much JJ Yelly, or is that why? Ah, no, there you go. I had 26% of. Told you this is gonna get fucked up. I have to stop doing this. 26% of Jimmy Johnson and 0% JJ Yelly. That makes much more sense. And then the ownership percentages were there. Yeah, so those are Yelly's ownership percentages. So I had 26, so I was still under. Um, people did like Jimmy Johnson. I was actually under them, so didn't like him nearly as much. But JJ Yelly was the low guy. That makes sense. Still, didn't play any of them. Kyle Busch, I had my 5% hedge. None of Hamlin, and then Cole Custer, I had a little bit of. So that runs through pretty much everything. Usually I try to take a look at the upcoming week, but we're kind of running short on time. Kind of funny to say that on a 45-minute podcast, 45-minute video, but I didn't want to include too much. I could have made it a full hour. Either way, overall, Las Vegas, much more exciting than I expected it to be. So that was two good races to start the season. That's a good way to go. They move on to Auto Club next, which I think is a 2 mile high tire wear track, if I do remember correctly. I don't remember ever really doing well there either, so hopefully we'll change that. Hopefully I have to build a model for that one from scratch. That'll help out. But thank you very much for stopping in, the two guests that were here. Um, by all means, reach out to me at JoeJets19 at um, Twitter, and also you can find me on Twitch at twitch.tv/JoeJets19. My FanDuel handle is JoeJets19 as well as my DraftKings handle. Thank you very much for stopping by, and I hope to see you next week.